Well, good afternoon from Strathroy Middlesex General Hospital Foundation. My name's Sue McLean. I'm the CEO of the foundation. And I've got some guests here that we're thrilled to have, and they'll each bring their own unique words and speech to this event. But it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Butcher to you. Dr. Rob Butcher, born in London, England, and came to London, Ontario in '82 to pursue graduate work at Western. He has a PhD in philosophy with a concentration in bioethics. He taught philosophy and ethics for 15 years, and since 1990 has provided ethics consulting services to the health, sport, and government sectors. So I would just like to say that as some of you will know, I've been here for a heck of a long time, and I know Dr. Butcher has been providing service to the physicians and staff for a heck of a long time as well. Yeah. So we're really pleased that he would come and do this interesting topic for us, and I hope you find it enjoyable. Thank you, Dr. Butcher.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
And I'd now like to introduce Julie McBrien, who is President and CEO of the Middlesex Hospital Alliance. Thank you, Julie.
Yep, thank you, Sue. And welcome and greetings from Strathroy Middlesex General Hospital. Thank you for streaming in with us this afternoon for the presentation. For those of you who don't know me, as Sue said, I am President and CEO of the Middlesex Hospital Alliance, which includes Strathroy Middlesex General Hospital. I've been President and CEO for just over a year. I live in Strathroy, and I'm happy to call SMGH my home hospital. I'm also a registered nurse, and I believe that's an advantage for me as President CEO. It gives me a better understanding of what our staff, physicians, volunteers, patients, and families need, and we can better meet their needs with my understanding around that. I want to be frank, healthcare is challenging right now. I'm sure everyone sees the news. There's health human resource shortages, long wait times, struggles to find a family doctor, many challenges in that regard. But I think despite all those challenges, we are truly fortunate to have a hospital here in Strathroy. And this hospital plays a vital role for our community. And we at the hospital are truly driven by our mission to provide the health care we would expect for our own families. And we really, for those of you who maybe been at our hospital and received care with us, I really hope we fulfilled on that mission. I pride ourselves on that smaller town hospitality with warmth, caring, focusing on a personalized patient and family experience, making connections, and we try to go the extra mile for our patients and families. So, and we truly do consider ourselves part of our community. So. Just wanting to share that with you. I think rural and community hospitals do play a vital role for our communities, and I see that only continuing and expand in the years to come in light of the challenges that are currently in our healthcare system. But we have an exciting topic today that Dr. Butcher is going to share with us, and I find it exciting because this is a topic near and dear to our heart at Strathroy Middlesex General Hospital. We've been doing and offering MAID services for a number of years, and we've cared for many patients in that regard because that's what patients want and need, and we listen to our patients and endeavor to provide that. We've also done MAID cases where patients have donated their organs because that is something our patients have wanted, and we have endeavored to support them in that wish. So very much looking forward to hearing what Dr. Butcher has to say. As we said in the beginning, he's been with us for 20 years, so we do consider him part of our family. And I know he does a lot to help out other smaller community hospitals like ourselves around ethics. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure.
Okay.
All right, are we ready? So you've got a bit of an introduction there. Let me say just a couple of things maybe before we launch into this. One of them is that what I'm going to try and do as we spend half an hour or so together is to unpack the ideas that are lying behind medical aid in dying, to talk a little bit about why we are where we are, maybe speculate a little bit about how things will continue to unfold. So trying to unpack it, trying to sort of look at the way things have unfolded, so that we can understand what's happening. That's one part of the task for today. The other thing that I think is worth identifying is that what medical aid in dying has done is it's, whether you think it's a good idea or not, it's forced us as a broader community to think more about death. What MAID does is it allows people to take control over their own lives as their lives are ending. But that, I think, should prompt, and that's a particular way of doing it, but I think that should prompt all of us to be thinking about our own mortality, I think is the right way of putting that. It's going to come to all of us. So how do we want that to unfold? When we think about the ends of our own lives, what does that look like? What would we want? What would we not want? And how do we share that with the people that we care about to try to ensure that those things occur as we reach the inevitable? So here we go. We're doing this sort of in the context of possible expansions to medical aid in dying. There are a number of areas where it's possible that the eligibility will be extended. So we'll talk about that sort of as we go through. But I want to do some background. I want to talk a little bit about why we are where we are. So let's start with, let me do this. We've been doing a version of these. At the moment, there are current suggestions that medical aid in dying should be extended, eligibility should be extended to people who solely have a mental health condition. At the moment, they're not eligible and won't be for at least another couple of years. The federal government has pushed that back into the future. There's also a conversation ongoing about whether medical aid in dying should be extended to people who are under the age of 18. At the moment, the rule is you must be 18 in order to have access to medical aid in dying. The tension there is that in healthcare, we typically don't think about there being an age of consent. In healthcare, typically we come at the consent question with a decision, an inquiry about whether or not the person is capable of consenting, whether or not they understand and appreciate the nature of their decision. And of course, understanding and appreciating the nature of a decision isn't contingent on that you've reached the number 18. And then finally, we'll have a bit of a conversation about whether medical aid in dying should be extended to people who make advance requests, people whose natural death is not yet reasonably foreseeable, but who would wish MAID to occur at some time in the future when they're no longer capable. So let me park those in your minds as questions. You can think about whether any of those would be a good idea. So let me do the history. Calling this the evolution of MAID. Get my voice going. So some of you will remember, seems like a long time ago, but some of you will remember a case in 1993. It was the Sue Rodriguez case. Sue Rodriguez had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. She was dying, and her death was inevitable. She asked the court to allow her to have somebody help her die. So, sort of the original format for what has now become medical aid in dying. So that Sue Rodriguez case went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. She was turned down. So she was not given permission to have somebody help her, although I think in the end she did, but nobody was prosecuted in that case. And when the court ruled in that 1993 case, they said, we're worried about what they called something like a slippery slope. We're worried about, if you allow it for Sue Rodriguez, we don't know what's going to happen next. And so from, if you like, caution, there was a split decision in the Supreme Court of Canada, and Sue Rodriguez was denied. Now, the change the shift occurred in 2015. So 22 years later, no, is that right? Anyway, a number of years later, don't do my maths for me, 18 years, 23, there you go. 23 years later, the Supreme Court heard another case, it's called the Carter case, really unusual for the Supreme Court to go back and look at a decision that they had in effect already made. They ruled in 2015 that the prohibition, at the time they were talking about physician-assisted death, the court ruled that the outright prohibition of physician-assisted death was unnecessary, and that physician-assisted death, what later became MAID, should be permissible, and here's their language, in cases of grievous and irremediable medical conditions with the consent of the patient. So the key ideas that are embedded in that 2015 judgment are the idea that the person has got a grievous and irremediable medical condition. Secondly, that there's suffering, and that they consent, that they ask for the process, which means that they've got to be capable of asking for it. So I'm thinking you can probably see this in the corner of your screen somewhere. This is from the judgment itself. And the judgment turns on Section 7 of the Charter. So Section 7 of the Charter is everyone has the right to life, liberty and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. So the section that Carter judgment turns on is our right to life, our right to liberty, and the right to security of the person. What the Supreme Court said is that the sections of the criminal code which prohibited helping somebody die are of no force or effect to the extent that they prohibit physician-assisted death for a competent adult person, here are the conditions, who clearly consents to the termination of life and has a grievous and irremediable medical condition. That causes enduring suffering that is intolerable in the circumstances of his or her condition. So this is straight out of the Supreme Court of Canada judgment, grounded in Section 7 of the Charter. The idea is that if somebody is suffering intolerably, if they have a grievous and irremediable medical condition, then they ought to be allowed to say what happens to them, and that entails that they ought to be allowed to have somebody help them if they choose that the best course of action for them is the end of their lives. So this is unpacking the Section 7 of the Charter. The prohibition on helping anybody end their lives, the court said, deprives some individuals of life. This turns what often gets viewed as a right to life argument sort of on its head, and the right to life, embodied in Section 7 of the Charter, becomes a right to have somebody help you die. The reason for doing that is that the prohibition on helping somebody has the effect of forcing some individuals to take their own lives prematurely for fear that they would be incapable of doing so when they reach the point where suffering was intolerable. So the idea there is, look, if I can't have somebody help me and I'm suffering intolerably, then, and what I fear is losing the ability to take my own life, to do it myself, then I might be forced to do it earlier than I would otherwise choose if I could have somebody help me do it. That's in essence the reasoning of the court. They picked up the notion of autonomy or independence. So again, this is from the Supreme Court of Canada judgment in 2015. The rights to liberty and security of the person, which deal with concerns about autonomy and quality of life, are also engaged. An individual's response to a grievous and irremediable medical condition is a matter critical to their dignity and autonomy. So the prohibition on helping someone denies people in this situation the right to make decisions concerning their bodily integrity and medical care, and thus trenches on their liberty. And by leaving them to endure intolerable suffering, it impinges on their security of the person. So that's the foundational idea. The idea is there was a section of the criminal code that said that you could not help somebody end their own lives. The court ruled that that was unjustifiable, that prohibition was unjustifiable in the case of a physician helping a patient. And it was that was unjustifiable, that prohibition was unjustifiable because of Section 7 of the Charter. So what that turned into was in 2016 legislation. It's called Bill C-14. That included in the legislation the requirement that a person has a reasonably foreseeable natural death. So there are also a whole series of safeguards that are embedded in the 2016 legislation. So medical aid in dying can only be performed by a physician or a nurse practitioner. They're the only two professionals who can do it. The person who requests MAID must be capable of requesting it. And that's assessed by the assessors or providers of medical aid in dying. So I have to clearly understand and appreciate the nature of the request that I'm making, the request that somebody will end my life. The way in which medical aid in dying should occur is prescribed. It's by injection. The other safeguards include that I've got to be over the age of 18. I've got to have this grievous and irremediable medical condition. My natural death must be reasonably foreseeable. That was in the original legislation, and I must be suffering intolerably. So the idea of the legislation is that it circumscribes the situations under which medical aid in dying can be provided. It requires the person to be capable, requires them to make a request, requires me to meet a whole series of conditions that are assessed by my provider assessor. There needs to be two of them. They need to agree that they meet the eligibility requirements, and then MAID can occur. So that's that was the original legislation. That was challenged in 2019, and it was challenged in a case in Quebec called the Truchon case. In that case, two people argued. So they had severely debilitating diseases, but where their natural death was not reasonably foreseeable. So those tragically debilitating diseases weren't actively killing them. Maybe the one way of putting it. So they said it's not fair. It's not fair. We're suffering intolerably. We should be just as free as anybody else in the community to have access to relief of our suffering, medical aid in dying, but we're not eligible because of the legislation. The judge in the Quebec Superior Court agreed with them and agreed that that they should have access to medical aid in dying. And what happened then, the way in which the federal government responded to that, is to create what are called two tracks, a two-track system, two ways of getting to medical aid in dying. So one of them, sort of the original track, I must be suffering intolerably, must have a grievous and irremediable illness, and my natural death must be reasonably foreseeable. That's track number one. That can occur quite quickly. At one point there was a waiting period that was required. That's now no longer required. But that's track one. Track two is for people who are suffering intolerably, have grievous and irremediable illnesses, but where their natural death is not reasonably foreseeable. For those people, medical aid in dying is available, but there's a 90-day waiting period, during which time they have to be assured that the patients are aware of all of the possible treatment options that are available to them, and that none of those treatment options they would choose in their own situation. So, two-track system. It's where we are now. Far and away, the bulk of people who choose medical aid in dying are choosing it under track 1. So these statistics are a bit old, but what they're showing you is the rate or the numbers of people that are choosing access to medical aid in dying. This goes up to 2021. As you can see, this is a constant increase, and that increase has continued. So the figures for 2022 are out now, and they show exactly the same sort of increase. The little red bit at the top of 2021 are those people who chose or got to medical aid in dying through track 2. So far and away the majority of people who are choosing medical aid in dying have a natural death that is reasonably foreseeable. As I say, those numbers are increasing, continue to increase at about 30% each year. This is just a little chart that shows you by the reasons, the causes for people choosing medical aid in dying, the underlying medical condition that has led people to that choice. And as you can see, far and away, 2/3 of the people who end up choosing medical aid in dying have got a primary cancer diagnosis. So that's 2/3 of the people who choose MAID. And then it drops quite dramatically from there. Cardiovascular diseases being the second highest number at about 18%. So if you look at the people or the gender distribution for people who are choosing MAID, so that's age and gender in this chart that you can see here. The median, the sort of the midpoint here, people between 65 and 85 constitute the bulk of people who are choosing medical aid in dying, and the split between genders is, I think, pretty close. It's about the same for men and women as they choose medical aid in dying. There are some more recent provincial statistics that are available. Quebec and British Columbia probably have currently the highest rates of medical aid in dying, probably up around 7%, something like that. In Ontario currently, the proportion of people who choose medical aid in dying at the end of their lives is about 5%, so about 1 in 20 people are currently choosing medical aid in dying, and of course that just straightforwardly continues to climb. Now I'm going to take a little bit of a tangent. Now please, if you've got questions, you can throw them into the chat, send them in, and we'll see if we can handle some of those. What I've tried to give you is a picture of sort of the overall regime for medical aid in dying, the way in which it's being approached as a healthcare practice. It is something that is increasingly chosen by people. It requires a request and an assessment procedure. It requires 2 assessors to review the person's capacity to make the decision, their ability to understand, to know exactly what it is that they're doing and exactly what it is that they're choosing. And it requires that the person has got a grievous and irremediable medical condition that they are suffering. So that's sort of the package of safeguards that are built in. I'm going to make a little bit of a shift, and I'm going to talk about some areas where there have been suggestions that the eligibility for medical aid in dying should be extended. So I've given you the current conditions. There are three main areas where there are ongoing discussions about whether medical aid in dying should be extended to a group of people who are currently excluded. One of them concerns people who solely have a mental health condition. So let me try and explain that. Currently, here are the key features. I must be capable of making my own choices. So I must understand and appreciate the choices that I'm going to make. It would be possible for me to have a mental health condition, to be capable of making my own choices, and to have some other disease or disability that caused me, in the package, intolerable suffering. And under those circumstances, I may qualify for medical aid in dying. Currently, I could not qualify for medical aid in dying if I solely had a mental health condition. So that mental health condition might be causing me intolerable suffering. If there might not be a cure for my mental illness, but currently I would not be eligible to have access to medical aid in dying. That was supposed to have changed in March of 2024, March of this year. There was a clause in the previous legislation that had explicitly excluded people who solely had a mental health condition. That clause was supposed to be removed in March of 2024, but the federal government made a decision to delay that. So I think currently we will not get MAID for people who solely have a mental health condition until at the earliest 2026. So the idea was that Canada was not ready to implement that change. Now, having said that, it's worth looking at the discussion that lay behind that. So why would you extend medical aid in dying to people who solely had a mental health condition? So this slide we've got up here sort of sets up the problem. So on the one hand, if MAID is permitted for people who solely have mental health conditions, then some people will die because they've had access to MAID who could otherwise have recovered. That's the problem on the one side. If you don't allow medical aid in dying to people who solely have a mental health condition, then we condemn people to intolerable suffering from which they could have found relief. And that intolerable suffering might cause them to take their own lives. So either of these two options is bad. It's bad to require people to continue to suffer when there is no other way of relieving their suffering. It's bad that some people might end up having access to medical aid in dying who could otherwise have recovered. It's which mistake, if you like, do you want to make? What the federal government has done is said we're not willing to make the mistake which would permit some people to have access to medical aid in dying who might otherwise have gone on to recover. So we're not going to permit it yet. But that condemns some people to continued suffering. So the issues that are sort of embedded in there are issues concerning recovery, what it is to recover in from a mental illness, what it is to live under a recovery model. There's a fairness issue, an issue of, if you like, a human rights issue. Why is it that just because of my diagnosis, I'm not able to gain access to care that's available for other people? And then a third puzzle that's sort of mixed in there is what sometimes gets called a question about the goals of psychiatry. The purpose of psychiatry is to help people recover. And one of those fundamental elements has been identifying what gets called suicidal ideation. So identifying the times in which suicidal ideation is pathological, it's a part of the mental illness. And here what would be required is that somehow we've got to be able to distinguish between those situations where having access to medical aid in dying, or the request for medical aid in dying, is part of a person's mental illness, in effect suicidal ideation, or is not, is a, if you like, a reasonable response to an intolerable and hopeless ongoing set of sufferings. So that's the sort of the challenge that's embedded in there. There is some support out in the community. It's I just ran over that. A little over 50% of people, when polled in 2022, said that there should be access to medical aid in dying for people who solely have a mental health condition. But that's less support than is found in general for medical aid in dying. This is just sort of picking up some of the concerns that are embedded in that question about allowing access to MAID for people who solely have a mental illness. Is the suffering real? Yes, I'm certain that it is. Are mental illnesses sometimes irremediable, untreatable? And can people who've got a mental illness actually consent to their own death? So it's suffering. I think the argument is completely clear. It's certainly the case that the suffering that some people experience through their mental illnesses is just as intense, just as real as the suffering caused by any other illness. It is certainly the case that some people respond to psychiatric treatment, but not always. So that's the untreatable condition. And then the autonomy puzzle is whether or not a person is able to autonomously, independently choose to have access to medical aid in dying. So all of those are in the mix as people are thinking about whether medical aid in dying ought to be extended to people who solely have a mental health condition. The current answer is no. You can imagine that changing at some time in the future. So, one of the other areas of conversation about the possible expansion of medical aid in dying concerns the expansion for people who are sometimes called mature minors. So these would be people under the age of 18. They have to meet all of the criteria that currently exist for access to medical aid in dying. The only suggested change is that a person would not need to be 18 years of age. So there was a parliamentary joint committee that you got some questions for me?
I do.
Oh, well, thank you. So look, we're trying to make this as interactive as we can. What do you want to do? Do you want to read them out?
Yeah, I'll read them out to you.
Come on then, thank you.
What is the most common reason for MAID?
So the most common underlying medical condition is cancer. That's the most common underlying medical condition. There's a little blurb on the forms that people fill in where people get to identify what their reasons are. And they almost always include the suffering component, so that people are identifying that they're suffering. But they also often identify that they are unable to perform the ordinary activities of daily living. So something like the burdens of life are so great that they take the view that they're better off removed from that.
Thank you. Is MAID covered by OHIP?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I'm doing a frowny yes. Yes. I'm pretty certain it is.
Again, depending on the reason for MAID, can your organs be donated after a MAID procedure?
This is really interesting. Yes. Under certain circumstances, yes. So it turns out that Ontario is the leading jurisdiction in the world for organ donation after medical aid in dying. So yes, the way the process is supposed to work is that when it's known that a person wants MAID, in particular if this is occurring in a hospital context, then that hospital is supposed to inform Trillium Gift of Life Foundation, and then the person would be contacted, and there can be some conversations about what might be possible. So yes.
Great. Well, how long does the MAID process take?
How long does it take to die? Is that?
How long does it take with the paperwork in your meetings first?
Right. I think people can turn this around fairly quickly. So I'd say you'd be looking at days, but a small number of days. It could be as quick as that, but it doesn't need to be. So it's entirely possible that you might go through the process and set a date sometime in the future. And of course, you can change your mind.
Fantastic. And after the process is in place and the procedure is complete, how long does it take to die?
I think it's moments.
And
so let me say something else. Just let me comment on that. I've not been present. As MAID was first being introduced, I was party to every organisation I worked with would do a MAID debrief. They'd bring together the people that had participated to have a conversation. What have we learned? The words that I heard used were serene. That was the word that cropped up the most. That the process, the entire process, is sort of pretty much driven by the patient. And yeah, so the number of times I heard that, the number of times I also heard that as people went through that process, they'd go through acts of meaning making. They would make that event meaningful to them. And let me do the broader picture here. That's a message I think that we can take around death and dying in general. So how do we make that? I was going to use the word celebrate. It's the wrong word, but how do we commemorate that in a way that is meaningful for the person concerned?
Absolutely. And one of the last questions is, why do people oppose MAID? Or what are the largest reasons that you see?
Yeah. So for certain, there are a number of objections that are grounded in different religious traditions. So there are many religious traditions which in effect take the view that the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. That it is something as significant as the end of a person's life is in the hands of a higher being, and we ought not to usurp that power. So I think that's present in more than one religious tradition, and I think that's one of the pieces. I think beyond that, there's a worry about where it goes. There's a fear. Let me put it like this: I think all of us want more choices for ourselves. So I certainly want the widest possible range of choices. But I'm not always sure that everybody else makes such good choices, and I think that's part of the fear that's embedded in this.
All right, that was the last question that we had come up. So, do you have any closing remarks, Mr. Butcher?
No. I think all I'm going to say is that we were talking a little bit about the ways in which there are proposals to extend access to medical aid in dying. We spoke a little bit about mental health. Then we just identified under the age of 18 as one. And then the third area for proposal of expansion is for what are called advance requests. So it's the idea that I might now, on my diagnosis of an illness that is eventually going to kill me, could I make a request now to have medical aid in dying at some time in the future? So it's the sort of maybe the dementia case. Could I, on my diagnosis of dementia, while I'm still capable of making my own decisions, say that I'd like this to occur at some time in the future? It's not allowed right now. In Quebec, there is new legislation that will permit that, and I can imagine that sort of trickling out to the rest of the country in the future.
Perfect. And do you have any literature or website that you'd like to, if people have questions,
Yeah, no, that
where
is
they can find more information?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you'll find that the Dying with Dignity website is a good one. On a broader, as a broader look at this, as one thinks about one's own mortality, Advanced Care Planning Ontario is pretty good, in fact really good, so advanced care planning, for helping people think through the sorts of things that they would like at the end of their lives. So that's another useful resource.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Butcher. We really appreciate it. And this video will be available for people to view online after the fact. And thank you so much for your time.
And thank you for being with us. Bye.